say it. Betschart, yeah. She's a co-founder and chief entrepreneurship officer for WeRobotics. She's a passionate tech-for-good entrepreneur with a long-standing career in SMEs, multinationals, and startups, including in the drone industry and for digital transformation initiatives. Her strategic advice, operational insights, and design thinking methods allow new ventures to turn their ideas into viable and successful businesses. So this is already really good. She's the co-founder, and as I said, of WeRobotics, an international not-for-profit organization that strives to democratize robotics for the benefit of all. And you're going to be talking about that. I think I'm going to stop here. This way I give you more room for your presentation. Thank you. Let's welcome Sonja.
Do you have a clicker?
Oh, yes, we have that.
To start out. Somebody has a clicker? No. Hi, fantastic. Thank you very much. Thanks for coming back. Well, the ladies this morning didn't really make it easy for us in the afternoon to start because they were so amazing that the pressure is up. And I guess all of you had some good lunch and now you're ready for a little nap, so I'll do my best to keep you awake. And I hope to do that with humor, with color, and most of all, with making you think out of the box. And that's what I want to achieve, to see how can you use tech in a different way. So thank you, Thaisa, for inviting me. I'm really, really happy to be here. And I never start a talk without talking about what is most important to me, and it's passion. I'm a very passionate person, and my three passions when it comes to professional passions are people, are empowering also people again, to be independent, and technology. And I have been lucky throughout all of my 20-plus year career. I always had at least one of these passions, if not two, in my jobs. But I would never have dreamt that I actually can bring all three together and spend my days living and actually making money out for my salary, combining all three passions. And all three passions, actually, for me, it was to combine them in something that we could call a social tech business. But actually, how can you build a social tech business? And how can you do something that is meaningful and sustainable? And it brings together kind of my three passions also. So the first part, the social part, is, I think for any kind of business, the most important thing is to look at the need. What is the human need that you actually want to answer? And I think for that, digital technologies and digital transformation initiatives are actually pretty good because a lot of them start with thinking about the need, because they also use methodologies like design thinking that help them go through that process. But I think all of us, we always need to remember, especially in the technical world, that it's not about technology. It is first and foremost about need, and when it's about need, it's about humans. So we always need to start with the humans. Then to that, we actually can put a layer over that then is the technology, if you want. And technology is nothing else than feasibility. To ask ourselves, it's okay, now we have the need, and there's many technologies out there, but not all actually fit this need. So where can you find that sweet spot where these two meet? And this, a lot of companies do. But a lot of companies, a lot of time, leave out the last part, is the viability. To say, like, how viable is it, like the business part of it? And this is, for me, my first experience in a not-for-profit company. I always worked for for-profit companies. And I think in our not-for-profit world, even more so, people leave out the viability. Because they just think, it's not-for-profit, it's an NGO, you get donors to give you money, and you spend it on good things. But actually, I think today, this time has evolved. And you need to think around to say, like, how can we make even a not-for-profit viable, that it can survive by itself, that it can create value that people are actually open to pay for. And how can you do that in a meaningful way and in an innovative way is by addressing all of these three elements, because if you combine them right, then you get that kind of sweet spot in the middle that makes it meaningful and sustainable. And this is what we actually want to shoot for also with V Robotics. This is what we want to address. And I just wanted to give this as a little opener because I think it's very important, especially when talking about technology and when talking about digital transformation, to never forget that you actually need to cover all three of these things to make it sustainable, and also meaningful. So this said brings me to my why. Why did we build V Robotics, and why do we believe it's important? I don't know, have you ever heard already talk about the digital divide? Who here has heard about that? Okay, so about 1/4 of the people, which is a good start. I think it's, I'll give a little explanation about it. And it's the digital divide, but the exact same thing happens when it comes to robotics. So it's the same, it's a kind of a technology divide, where we have what we call the global north. Saying like you look at the planet and you like to look at the north part, so we would be sitting in the north. So we are very lucky, and we sometimes forget how lucky we are. Because we have this kind of combination of technology, education, and government. So before doing what I do, I worked in the drone industry. I started in the drone industry when it started in 2013. And though these are very, very new technologies, most of universities today, technical universities, already include in their curriculum this kind of technology. So it's that mix between the government, the education, and foremost the industry who invests into this. The industry boosts that, so it's the industry, the companies that actually help the universities to use their hardware and software. They get training, they get access to that. Our governments have the luxury to say this is important, so we push it. So we get, again, this nice little sweet spot in the middle where we actually can start using these technologies. And this is how we get to use new technologies, because they're brought to us through education, they're pushed by our government, and the industry pushes them a lot. But what does not happen is the same thing in the South. And why does it not really happen? Because already education and government, they're not always talking together. If you want to get a quality education in a lot of developing countries, you need to go to private schools. Not a lot of people have access to private schools. So already you kind of do not cross these two things. Now you add the industry to it. The industry is not investing in developing countries. Like I said, so I work for the drone industry. For us, these were markets that were too small. They were too fragmented. It would not make sense when you have a new technology where you can build these big markets and with really interesting margins to invest into developing countries, because it's just not a good business strategy. The market is too small. You're like much better off for the next 10 years to invest in developed countries and the global north, and then possibly, you know, like your market share is high, and then you say like, okay, so now I actually could start with new markets, with developing markets, and then you would do that. But that would mean these new technologies get to these countries in 10 or 15 years. Now, does this seem something that actually is fair? We do not believe so. And I think the best example when it comes to new technologies is the mobile phone. Like I lived in Africa before, and I worked in Africa. And I've seen Africa without mobile phones, before the mobile phone. So there was no communication. There were no telephones in Africa, no telephone lines. People would talk in person, and if they would not see each other for 4 months, well, then they would not talk in 4 months. Then came the mobile phone, and everybody would be connected. So it went from nothing to everything. And it's a bit the same when it comes to robotics technology, and especially drones, and creating data product out of drones. You go from nothing to a lot of things. And it's affordable, it's easy to use, so very much like the mobile phone. But the problem is this. The problem is that kind of last mile problem. How do you give access to people to these new technologies? The industry is not doing it. Government has no hurry to do it, and the education system is disconnected from that too. So what we want to do with V Robotics is to kind of fill that gap. We want to address the robotics divide by building solutions for the social good sector. So now this is like a big sentence, like robotics for the benefit of all and building solutions. So I said, like, you know, I can say that to drone specialists, but to a lot of us, this is like, whoa, yeah, sure. So what does it actually mean? So I brought some examples back to you to say, like, what do we mean when we say, like, use robotics and use emerging technologies and the mix between robotics and artificial intelligence in the use for social good? So a first really good use case is humanitarian aid. So unfortunately, a lot of disasters happen. And like a lot of, like 90% of disasters do not happen in developed countries. They happen in developing countries again. So like no access, but lots of other stuff like disasters. So you have a really big need when you look at the need again. The need is really there. So today, this is, for example, the city of Dar es Salaam. And that image is, I would say about, when was that? In November of last year. It's like 10 times as bad now. Just came back from last week from Dar es Salaam. And Dar es Salaam is seriously flooding because it has bad rains each year. And some years it really gets worse, like this year. So you have flooding. So like when you have flooded areas, today the government and the local government who wants to address the flooding understand how many people have been touched by these floods and what should we do to actually get these rivers to run faster and to get that water out. They either have no data or they have satellite data, which is here on your left. And you say rain, well, it means clouds. And clouds means no data a lot of times. So you can see nothing. So what you can do with drones, you can, of very specific areas, take very high resolution imagery and provide the local partners with this kind of data to know what to do. Same thing here. This was a cyclone who passed through this place that is called Tonga, beautiful island that also has a lot of cyclones. So when you have places like that, you want to know quite fast what buildings were damaged, what were fully damaged, partially damaged, not damaged. You can do this by having geospatial information, by building maps, and by being able to, in a really fast way, actually say, this is the damage that happened. And then inform agencies that come in and that rebuild, what is the state on the site. So for humanitarian aid, for pre- and post-disaster management, drones and the data they can provide are really, really good tools. Then I'm sure you all heard about this. You all heard about cargo drones, using drones to send stuff. So we're not there yet. So it's a lot of experiments when it comes to cargo drones anywhere, even in the developed world. But the idea is to use drones in the health sector to send very urgent medical deliveries. So it would not be sending Amazon packages, but it would be to, you're in Peru in the Amazon, and one of the #1 death threats in Amazon is snake bites. And these local villages, one would wonder, huh? Yeah, no, so there's a lot of small issues like snake bites where people die because they're too far away from the next big clinic, and the small clinics don't have the anti-venom because the anti-venoms only are valid for some weeks, and you cannot stock them everywhere. So using drones is actually something that is a really good idea. Because by boat, I don't know if you've ever seen images of the Amazon, the rivers really kind of ring around. So it can take you to get from point A to point B, which might only be 30 kilometers, it might take you 8 hours. With a drone, it might take you 40 minutes. So these are kind of the use cases where it really would make sense to have drones who deliver specific medical supplies. And the good thing is, these medical supplies, they don't really weigh 2, 4, 6 kilos. They will weigh 100 grams, 200 grams. So it's really easy when it comes also to weight and feasibility. So this is a health use case. And another health use case is to say, couldn't we use drones to actually also possibly disseminate things? So this is a funny project we're working on. It's a project in, we actually tested it in Brazil. It's a project that tries to combat diseases like Zika. So any kind of mosquito disease like Zika or dengue, there's already companies and not-for-profits who use genetically modified mosquitoes to combat the other mosquitoes. And this has been done for many, many years. But they disseminate the mosquitoes with trucks and on foot. Now, especially for Zika, the problem is a lot of the hotspots are in areas there's no roads, and you cannot walk there. So what you do, you cannot disseminate mosquitoes from an airplane. It flies too fast, it flies too high. So the idea is to say, could we use drones and new technology to actually disseminate things like that? And this is a use case we're also testing. So for the health sector, very interesting applications. Then for development, there's in Africa, for example, one of the #1 issues in Africa when it comes to development today is land rights. People, they have their house, but they don't have a title deed for their house, they don't have a title deed for their farm, so it's a big issue. And for a lot of the houses, especially in, I would say, cities, their house is not 40 meters by 40 meters. Their house ground is going to be 3 or 4 meters by 3 or 4 meters. So when you use geospatial data like satellite data, it's not going to be good enough. So there's really good cases when it comes to using drones to create maps to address land rights. Or use new technologies in general, like here, to create new economies. Why wouldn't want to try to create small new economies and service businesses in the developing world? And then this is one of my favorite pictures. I just took it a month ago in the beautiful sunflower fields of backcountry Tanzania. So drones are a really great tool also to address certain issues in agriculture. A lot of developing countries, 80% of their economy comes from agriculture, and a lot of issues are either with not being able to estimate how much is going to be the outcome, or battling diseases, plant diseases. And drones and very specialized sensors can help a lot to address certain of these problems. So it's still in a very research part in some of them, but drones are used here. So I live like down the lake in the vineyards, and a lot of our Swiss vineyard farmers, they use drones. They use drones to see the health of their plants. So for a lot of plants in Africa, this could be used in the very same way. The last one is nature conservation. There's a lot of things you can do in nature conservation when it comes to new technologies and drones. You can provide very specific information. This is a project I did a while back in the Seychelles, and the goal was to address sharks and little shark puppies. It's a breeding ground for sharks, and to better understand how are these islands evolving, how can you actually find shark pups and measure them with drone imagery, so all possible, and very interesting use cases. So I hope this gives you a better view on what is possible when we say robotics for social good. You can address humanitarian aid, you can address health, you can address agriculture, nature conservation, development. So there's many, many things you can address. And I think the most interesting thing is, like a lot of people will talk about disaster and humanitarian aid. It's certainly the first one. But even if there's no disaster, there's still a ton of things you can do. And that's why it makes so much sense to build local capacity and local companies that use these technologies, because there's so much opportunity. Which brings us to our model. So what do we do at V Robotics? I said we want to kind of bridge that robotics divide. And how do we do it? So we have a quite complex business model, and possibly to backtrack just a second. So we're only 2 years old. So we're still a startup, not for profit. And we're, I think Tatiana, she left, she said it nicely this morning. So we're in that kind of model. You need to test, and you need to fail, and you need to learn. So we finished our proof of concept phase a good 9 months ago. And I think with concepts like those, you never finish testing, because it's new technologies and you apply it in very new ways. So it comes a lot with testing. So our model is, or this model is kind of the outcome of our proof of concept. And we say we want to do what we do with 3 different focus areas. And by using these 3 different focus areas, we actually can address 9 out of 17 of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So who talked this morning about SDGs? I think also Tatiana, about companies trying to address the SDGs. So with new technology, the cool thing is you can address 9 out of 17, which is like winning the SDG jackpot, I think. So for us, this is really something that is important. And it also shows that you possibly need a quite broad model, business model, to be able to address the different issues you want to address. So let me just go
remind quickly, what are the Sustainable Development Goals for those who don't know it, just quickly?
So the United Nations, let me go back here. United Nations, 2015 or before that, brought out a really comprehensive way of addressing any kind of activities countries do, organizations do. So all the UN organizations follow the SDGs. A lot of companies now start following the SDGs too. There's to say that it's 17 goals the UN set itself, I think, till 2030 to achieve these goals. So one of the goals is zero hunger. One of the goals is good health and well-being. So it's these kind of 17 goals. All the UN agencies, most of the governments, all the governments align to those two, and a lot of private companies align themselves to support these goals. So back to the model, I just run quickly through the model of what we do. So the first focus area that we have is to build local capacity. What does that mean? We want to create a network of, we call them flying labs. So they're like knowledge hubs, robotics knowledge hubs in developing countries. We want to build 8 regional ones to kind of cover the global south regions, but we also want to extend them to more countries throughout the south. So these are labs that are created a lot of time in collaboration with universities, with local NGOs, with local actors that are already there in business development or in innovation, where we bring together these different organizations and we create this space where local engineers can learn about drone technologies and robotics technologies and how to use them. So what we do, we give a lot of trainings. We give hardware trainings, how to use a drone to acquire data, but we also give software trainings, how then to make data products out of it and how to analyze that data. And as I just said, we try to bring this technology mostly to local engineers. So local engineers, they're fantastic with technology, but a lot of time they're kind of not so fantastic when it comes to business. So we said, you know, we cannot just train them on new technologies. They're gonna pick up like how to use a drone and how to create data products in 2-3 weeks. It's very easy technology. They're already an engineer. They already know how to use the traditional things. It's not gonna be much of a change to use new tools. However, to actually make a living using new technology, that's the real challenge. So we also do programs like business incubation programs for the ones who have been here last year and seen Alice de Tonac. So she and the Seed Stars focus on general technology. We do a bit the same when it comes to drone technology. So also have our business incubation programs and our mechanisms to then support the ones who go through these programs to help them build up their little companies. Because what we want to do in developing countries, we want to create this kind of market that uses these new technologies to be there when there's something bad happening. So again, back to Tanzania, when there's a flooding, there's a local companies who can address that flooding, but also when there's no flooding, they can do a ton of other things, have companies and actually live out of these new technologies, like anybody could do here, using the new technologies, setting up a business. So that's one of our focus areas, to create a global network of these flying labs to create this local capacity in developing countries. Now, on the other side, a lot of our stakeholders are the international NGOs, the UN agencies, because they kind of are our clients. And our clients, they do not think in Tanzania, Nepal, Senegal. They think in nature conservation, humanitarian, like disaster relief, or they'll think in health. So they're sector-oriented thinking, and they're going to be interested in more than just one country. So we've seen with our proof of concept, you know, if you just do the local capacity building, okay, we're losing out on actually the ones who can pay for these services for these local companies. And to get them, we need to more think in sectors. So what we're also building is sector-oriented programs, kind of knowledge programs for these 4 sectors that are really promising when it comes to this technology. So aid sector, health sector, ecology, which would mean agriculture, nature conservation, and development. So we're building up these kind of programs, which helps us, for example, when I do an agriculture project in Tanzania, to take the learnings, put it into this program, and share it with others. Again, like for example, in Humanitarian Aid, we work in Nepal. Nepal is a country that has a lot of landslides. Now we also work in Brazil, and some of the Brazilian areas have also a lot of landslides. So when you start putting together the knowledge we get from Nepal, put it in a program, the guys who run the Brazil flying labs can tap into this knowledge, and you start sharing in a sector way, and you just scale it faster, because you have the local part, but you also have the global part. And this brought us to our third part of our business model, is to say we actually need a platform to share it all. Because what we do, we are so lucky to get so much knowledge. We work in the countries, we address certain sectors, we're like collecting a lot of knowledge, and we need to share this knowledge, because the more we share, the more we can do. So we created conferences, we do webinars, so we have our own conference, which is called V Robotics Global, that we hold every year in New York. So we have our webinars, we just brought out an online training course, and then we also do guidelines. So we also think, like when you do a lot of projects, you get a lot of learnings, you also can help people with guidelines and learning paths. So this is the third part of our business model, which brings us to that again, like before, to say we believe only when we do all these three things, then we have that very sweet spot in the middle that makes us both meaningful and sustainable. Which brings me to my last slide, which back to this one, to Tonga. So our dream, let me tell you about our dream in Tonga. So Tonga got hit by a cyclone in January. And there's like a 95% chance it's going to get hit by a cyclone again next January or February, because it just happens every year. And when it happens, nothing happens, because nobody knows what actually is happening there. Nobody knows how many houses have been damaged. Nobody knows how much has been impacted when it comes to agriculture. Have they lost a lot of trees? Haven't they lost a lot of trees? And because the data is really difficult to get. So what we've done this year is a first little test. So when that cyclone hit, we also have a South Pacific Flying Labs, and our guys out there, and the girl actually also, went to Tonga and got imagery of certain of the areas that were addressed. And here you see one of the villages in Tonga. And with the colors you see like the houses and their level of damage. So now what we learned when we did this, we flew about, I think, over the course of 2 days, and you got 30,000 images. So when we shared these images with the relief agencies, they said, thank you very much. It will take us 4 months to analyze them. It's like, okay, now we have another problem. We have data, but it's too much data. So that's when he said, luckily there's AI and machine learning. There's machines can do much faster than what we do. So we did, together with the World Bank, an open AI challenge that actually the winner is going to be announced today at MIT in Boston. And so this OpenAI challenge reached out to everybody, so mostly to universities, to say, help us create algorithms, machine learning algorithms, that can address this question, like buildings and damages, and classify them into these 3 levels. Help us also identify trees, and what kind of trees, and are they damaged or not. So with these algorithms, what we want to do, our dream is to build an open AI database where you have all these kind of algorithms, and we're going to do a next OpenAI challenge in the fall, more for nature conservation. So the goal is really to say, create a lot of these kind of machine learning algorithms that can then run on drone imagery that is collected, and that anybody can tap into. So next time, in 2019, if unfortunately a cyclone hits Tonga again, the idea is that 48 to 72 hours after the cyclone, local people can say, 30% of the houses have been fully damaged. And relief agencies who come in, they know what they walk in. And then you really can make a difference. But this cannot happen if you don't have the local capacity, because nobody's going to fly out there and fly a drone and acquire that data. This is not going to happen if you don't have a global approach that brings it together. And this is not going to happen if you don't share. And we believe, and we'll see the result next year, that if what we tried to test out this year works, then our model makes a lot of sense. Thank you very much for your...
I'm so impressed, and I'm sure everyone is here. I'm so inspired by work. I think the common thing I heard from this morning is like there's this will to fail and to learn from failure, and that's the spirit as well also of Women in Digital. And I'm gonna just take one question for myself because I'm very interested to know how come, and I know one of the reasons why we're not talking more about robotics and drones for good. And obviously the media is really pushing for this fear factor about, drones are terrifying, drones are bad, or fantasizing, as you said, about medical aid. So what can be done, by whom, and what has been done right now? Are there ways to have crowdfunding or more public interest? And, in a way, I think we could all be more interested in the topic. So that's my question to you. And maybe the only question for the day. Apologies for the audience.
Thank you, Thaisa.
And you can guess I'm a big fan.
And I think, it's about this. It's about education. And I think the one thing that we see with everything, so when we start in a new country, to be able to fly drones, you actually need permission. So to get this permission, you have to go to the government. And a lot of governments are really weary when they hear the word drone, because the only thing they know is either luckily they possibly know about the cargo thing, but that's not sure. But they only know about the fact things. They're like, yeah, but then terrorists will let fall bombs on, no, there's anything can be used for good or for bad, but it's a thing about education. And that's why for us also the sharing is so important. So we try to publish about 2 to 3 blog posts a week. Of our projects and stories, and having flying labs, you actually can do a lot of stories. So I think by sharing stories and with webinars and just by inspiring everybody that we meet to kind of share these news, I think this is the way how we can show. And we're growing, so we already seen in 2 years, we have so much more stories now than we had 2 years ago. And by keep on doing this, I hope in some years, people, when they think about drones, they first think about the good they can do, and not the other kind of ways.
This is a subtle message you're sending. I'm sending as well to all you all. Is like whenever you have someone meeting someone, oh, drones are really bad and they're going to destroy us. Say no. I know someone, and there's WeRobotics, and have a look. So thank you very much. And now we have questions from the audience. Thank you. So there we have a question from Jane. Yeah, I know Jane.
Hi, thank you very much for the presentation, and really to answer Thaisa's question as well. It's more of a statement than a question. So for a few years, the industry I work in, we've been involved with looking for pipeline leak detection using drones. There are a lot of issues with this, mainly legal. You're not allowed to fly over anybody, and you have to be very careful of aviation issues. So this all went very well. And then I was at a conference a couple of weeks back. Sorry. A couple of weeks back, and one country in Africa, who was the first one to use drones to actually survey pipeline rights of way to make sure that there were no people digging into it and this, that, and the other. Now they reckon there's 4 times more drones being used by groups to sabotage pipelines than there are being used to survey to see if they're being attacked. It's just a comment, but it's something we need to think about.
Yeah, so let's strive to work to put it to good use also.
Yeah. Question there? Sorry, just looking. You need to put on.
Hello. I am a former humanitarian aid worker, so I try to understand the topic, and I would like to know if you thought about already about an idea to help countries where during electoral process, when the government cuts off all the communication on social media, to stop to influence the election process.
Right? No. For us. Unfortunately, I think there's many issues, but I think this is one. We can work on any issue that kind of needs geospatial data or that would need an urgent delivery. That's where we focus on. And that's what we know in terms of, like technology and feasibility of what we can do. This is where we can find an answer. So unfortunately, no, this is an issue that we do not address.
Another question here.
Thank you for such an inspiring presentation. I'm really amazed with what your company can do, and it feels very, very inspiring, to be honest. I would like to know, in terms of the support from governments, from international organizations, are you getting that support to really go through those 3 areas that you are trying to focus on? And second question, if I may, how now you are only 2 years old, how do you see your company growing, let's say, in 2 to 5 years' time? Thank you.
Right. So can you just repeat the first part of your first question?
Yeah, it was about, in terms of the support from
Okay.
governments and international organizations.
So yeah,
'Cause I
possibly
could
a
see
bit
that,
to the
they
business model.
They should support you, but
Right.
in reality, what does it mean?
Yes, so possibly to the business model. So today our business model is fully on donations, or like 80% on donations, because we're starting out. And we also believe, to set up a lab, it needs to be funded. So we try to give them funding for 2 or 3 years. So there were donations come in, and we get support from some governments for donations already. And we get a lot of donations from private foundations, so from a lot of the tech foundations, actually. And so this is to the part of the business model and the donation process now. But we get, like, it really depends what countries you work in. Sometimes you get a lot of support, and sometimes you get a lot of opposition. I think it really depends on the country. I can give you like one African country I'm working in. It's really difficult because the government is but it's again about the education thing. I think it needs education, and we're working with them. So we're working with pilot projects so they can see the use and then they can understand, but that takes a year or 2. And then I'm gonna go to another African country in 3 weeks that invited us, that said, like, please come. We want to have a 3-day conference with all the government offices, with all the NGOs in our country, and with the university, and we want to bring all your stakeholders together, figure out together what could we do with drones, and then decide how we can set best up a flying lab. So it's like, wow, this is amazing. So you actually have both sides. So I think it's nice to see these kind of governments. And I understand to a certain degree the other governments, because in our countries it's the same. They're afraid of what they don't know. So I think
When they start hearing about the others, how it's starting to work out, they will
Yes.
start calling you.
And also we're like, I have one quality that is, I'm very perseverant. So, because I lived and worked in Africa before, you need to push a bit. So, and you need to also have patience. So I believe that if you educate by applying it locally with local people, once people see the good, the fear is gonna go away. Because a lot of the resistance really has to do with fear. And this you only can counter with education. And not by me as a Swiss person going and flying, but by inspiring local people, and they are the champions, and they are the ones who actually do the work, then the government will really see the differences, to say it's just another technology used by people in our country.
If I might, for the second question, what I invite you and everyone here, since they blog 3 times a week, is to go and see the actuality. I'm sure, and the news, if you don't mind, because this way we have time for another question. And just reminded from Antonella Notari-Vischer, do you know her from Humanity Foundation?
No.
She was one of the speakers last year, and she said something similar to what you're saying today, is that they have this program everywhere in the world in Afghanistan. They said it was very hard to approach. They had a tech for coding for girls in Afghanistan at school, and they had to work out of fear and ignorance. And I think it's the same thing here. You have to get people together and have education.
Right.
So thank you for your answer. And we have one last question, because
Just a
then we
quick question.
have Caroline.
Thanks for a wonderful talk. You shared just a moment ago a little bit of information on project funding. I was just curious how you as an organization got off the ground, and because it's quite ambitious what you're doing.
Yeah.
And nice business model, but not necessarily something that the typical investor might grok right away. So if you could just share a little bit about your journey. Thanks.
Yeah. So I'll try to make it short. So for us, it was a difficult decision in the beginning to say, are we going to be a for-profit or a not-for-profit? Because what we are is a social enterprise. And like, both have advantages and not. So we decided to go for the not-for-profit because most of our clients are UN affiliates and AGOs. And if you're not a not-for-profit, then you're always going to come second. They first have to source to not-for-profits, and then they only can source for for-profits. So I'm a business person, so I said like, if we are a not-for-profit, we're going to get first spot on these lists, so let's do that. But we definitely want to push to say like, we want to be self-sustaining. So the flying labs, they can be self-sustaining in 3 years by services, by offering trainings, by renting material, by consulting, by doing projects. And us as a head organization, and that actually I didn't answer your second question, like where do we stand, is to say we also believe that in the coming 3 years, we still need a bit of support, but then we can nicely survive on doing projects, pilot projects, research projects for UN affiliates, and we can possibly cover 50% of our cost, and Flying Lab should be able to cover 100% of their cost. Today we have foundation funding, and we have government funding, and we do projects, for example, for UNDP, for the World Food Programme, and these are paid projects because they're going to pay for us to solve an issue. So we get funding from this, and then possibly to answer your second question, and then I'm finished, is to say, so our dream is to stay small. I think, our goal is not to get big. Our goal as a head organization, as WeRobotics, we're a network organization, so it's a very digital business model. Today we're 20 people in 8 countries and 8 continents. So, and we don't have offices. So we believe that WeRobotics itself, the global part, should never be bigger than 15 or 20 people. Where there should be people is in the flying labs. But these you want to make independent as fast as possible. So you want to give them funding for 2 or 3 years, and then you tell them, spin off. So I'm just building the flying labs in Tanzania. We're 5 people on the board, 3 from WeRobotics and 2 locals. And the goal we set ourselves, each year, one of us pulls out. And in 3 years, it's a fully Tanzanian company. And it must make its own money. So, let's get them there. And then this way, as WeRobotics, you never have to be more than 15 or 20 people, because that's going to be enough. And that's how we're going to sustain ourselves, because we're going to get small. And also, being small will help us to keep on innovating. We want to, we started with flying drones. Now we're testing out underwater drones. Terrestrial drones are coming. We're working with AI. We want to look into blockchain. How can you possibly, get the data and use blockchain for the land rights? So we want to look in all these new technologies, but if you get big, then you spend a lot of time on, building your organization or getting big or finding money to be big, and not on innovation. So we believe very much in the digital business model is to say, think in an ecosystem way, create an ecosystem, be kind of that engine in the middle of the ecosystem, but there's tons of smart other people and companies out there. Collaborate, do partnerships, and stay small. And my kind of model is the World Economic Forum. They're so big, but actually, there are 200 people. You look at this organization, I always believe there must be 5,000 people, but they're not, because they're just working with ecosystems, and we want to do the same thing. And that will also help us with funding, because we stay small.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.